a great honor to be here. I want to thank everyone at CSIC, especially Blanca, for organizing everything. As we say in Hebrew, for the yozma, for the initiative to put this together. And it's quite exciting to speak about this topic in front of scholars, biblical scholars, and scholars of Islamic law, and history of Jews in Spain. Now, you're probably wondering, maybe you're a bit surprised that falconry is discussed in rabbinic literature. I was also very surprised about that, and that was one of the reasons why I pursued the study. And through the course, but if you think about it, it's not so surprising, because two of the great falconry centers of the world are Persia and medieval France. And there were Jewish communities associated with those two areas. I also wanted to mention that I published an article, Jewish Hawking in Medieval France, which discusses in the French community where Jews actually practiced falconry. There were communities of Jews that practiced falconry, and that's a topic of discussion in the article. And there's even a tradition that Rabbeinu Tam, who was a grandson of Rashi, that he himself practiced falconry, and that's discussed in depth in my article. We'll go into that later. But this aspect with Islamic law was something that I wrote about in a paper for a class paper for my teacher, Professor Shama Friedman of Bar Ilan University, and we were very excited that he was the winner of this year's Israel Prize. If anyone doesn't know about the importance of the Israel Prize, it's something like the Nobel Prize. Or if you've seen the movie Footnote, which was the Academy Award, then you'll understand exactly how important it was. Okay, so Blanca selected this image from a Haggadah, from a Jewish Haggadah, the Spanim-Resk Haggadah. And since you selected it, I'll mention it. The scene depicted here is Moses warning Pharaoh at the river. And the verse up at the top, Ha-Levi, that, and if you notice in the Haggadah, you see the symbol of Castile, the three castles, the herald up at the top, the heraldry symbols, and Pharaoh has a hawk. Is holding the hawk. So the reason why he has the hawk is something that has concerned a lot of biblical commentators, is what was Pharaoh doing at the water? Why does the Bible go to the trouble to explain that this scene is occurring at the Nile River? What was Pharaoh doing at the Nile River? Now, the classic what all the Jewish children learn is that he went there to Cuarto de Baño, because he was portraying himself as a deity, and the deity doesn't do that, so he had to do it in secret at the river, and that was where that. This is the standard midrashic interpretation, but this is an alternate interpretation depicted here, which is found in the Bible commentary of Joseph Bechor Shor. And according to him, at the river, Pharaoh was hunting falconry. And in Old French, rivière, the word rivière, which means river, when we think of rivière, we might think of swimming or rafting or something like that. But in medieval France, rivière meant falconry. That was a second definition. Okay. Now let's discuss falconry a bit in the world, where it's coming from. So nobody really knows where the technology or this ability to train the raptors, these birds, where it's developed, but most scholars believe that it's coming from somewhere in the East. Nobody knows where exactly, and it's shrouded in ancient mystery. So here I put a couple of images from India, from the area, and falconry is practiced throughout those regions today, Mongolia and Persia. So falconry traveled from the east through Persia into the Islamic world. And it also traveled through probably through the north into Northern Europe and Eastern Europe, possibly not through the Islamic world. There's these different migrations of falconry from the east into Europe. So there's probably a first wave of falconry coming through the north, and then there's a later wave of different technologies, of methods of falconry coming through the Islamic world into Europe. And they're more sophisticated, and we have many falconry manuals, many written in Arabic, Persian, and they were translated into Latin in the court of Alfonso and by Frederick. And these manuals are fascinating. They contain veterinary information about the hawk and process of how to train the raptors, which is a very complicated process, a very demanding process. Here we have an example of Persian falconry, and here at the bottom we have Mandaic. Mandaic is a dialect of Aramaic, which is the closest dialect to Jewish Babylonian Aramaic. So I have a friend, Matthew Morgenstern at Tel Aviv University, who sent me this interesting falcon from a Mandaic manuscript, and their manuscripts also discuss falconry, often using Persian loanwords. Also, the Babylonian Talmud, when discussing falconry, often uses Persian loanwords. And that has been a source of confusion because in the medieval scholars who were not familiar with Persian in Europe, such as Rashi, weren't able to identify that the sources were referring to falconry. Many of my scholar friends, whenever they find something about falconry, they send it to me. I'm the falconry guy. Okay. We don't know. Like, say here, this Persian. I think it's the 19th century. It's much later. Many times it's difficult to date, especially with the art and some of the sources. There was a Persian falconry manual which was translated to English from the early 19th century and describes certain processes which it's hard for me to say if they were the same processes as discussed in the Talmud Bavli 1,000 years before. I don't know, because sometimes we don't know if things are ancient or modern. Like here we have a Mongolian falconer with he looks ancient, but he's talking on the cell phone. So you can see. We have falconry depicted in ancient Israel, but there's a very, very important distinction to be made between the West and the East. Falconry is never discussed in all of Greek and Latin literature, ever. Never discussed. Only maybe briefly in describing the Persians, the Easterns. It was not practiced. Hunting was referred to as kinegeticus, and that is related to canine, to dogs, to hunting with dogs. Hunting with dogs was very popular all over the world, also in the East, but falconry was not known. So the depictions of falconry here, these are Yahad coins. We have writing in the what we call Ktav Ivri, the ancient Hebrew script, Yahad, Yud He Dalet. At the top, this is probably an image of a deity, of a god, a pagan. It's not exactly clear. But hawks and falcons are associated with royalty and deity throughout the world, in the East and in the West. But they're not exclusively. There are also more common people in falconry centers who would practice falconry, but it always, pretty much everywhere, has a regal connotation. Like we saw at the beginning with Pharaoh, the image of Pharaoh. Okay, now let's get into the meat of the matter. Here I put just the outline of some of the sources for what we're discussing, because I don't know who's familiar with rabbinic literature or who's familiar with Islamic legal literature. And I just want to mention off the bat, I am not at all expert in Islamic literature by any way, shape, or form. I do not know Arabic, and I read the relevant sections of the Quran in Hebrew and of Ibn Rushd in English, and I'm really just opening up in that branch for a dialogue with someone like Ramadan or someone who is much more familiar with it. But even through my very limited knowledge, I think you'll be able to see that the parallels that we find between the two legal branches are quite striking. So I tried to make this in chronological order. We have Bible, then we have early legal sources, the Mishnah, early Midrash, Braitot in the second level. Then we have the Talmud Bavli. Now the early sources are from Palestine. They're Palestinian sources, the land of Israel. And then Talmud Bavli, we're moving into the other region, where Persian culture is much more in the milieu. Then we have a period of the Geonim, which is not so well understood, and then we have a period which was referred to as the Rishonim, the first ones, the early ones, and there things are much in Jewish rabbinics. Things are very much more clear about the particular rabbinic personalities who are speaking and their relationship one to another. From the Talmud Bavli and the Geonim, it's very difficult to sort out what is historically reliable, pseudepigraphic, and whatnot. Now, on the Islamic side here, I tried to put it in chronologically as best I could, Quran, Hadith, Fiqh, but really conceptually, Quran lines up with Bible, as these are the verses, which are then later going to be expounded, and Hadith lines up very much with Mishnah and early Midrash, authoritative sources which are considered very highly authoritative, potentially, if they're accepted. And then the whole discussion about everything, fiqh, is conceptually, it's with all the later categories, Talmud Bavli, Geonim, Rishonim, everything, all these discussions there. Okay, so we'll start with the biblical sources, which describe the obligation for ritual slaughter of an animal. So in Hebrew, we have here in Exodus 22:30, we have Hatzon u'bakar yishachet lahem u'matzah lahem im et kol degei hayam yasef lahem u'matzah lahem. This is the same verse. This is the verse at the bottom. It's not as a mistake. This is not the verse which it's the same verse twice in the Hebrew. So this is the bottom source. Actually, the Hebrew does not match there. It was my error. I'm sorry. So we'll just read the top source in English. And ye shall be holy men unto me, to you kadoshim. Therefore ye shall not eat any flesh that is torn of the beasts in the field. Basar basadeh taref lo tochelu. That's the Lashon. That's the Hebrew of the verse. That's the important part. You shall cast it to the dogs. Do not eat any flesh that is torn of the beasts in the field. So, the bottom verse, if flocks and herds be slain for them, will they suffer for them? Or if the fish of the sea be gathered in, will they suffer for them? From the second verse, we learn that the obligation for ritual slaughter applies to flocks and herds. Yes, to sheep and cows, but not to fish. Fish of the sea are differentiated out in the verse. And there is no obligation of ritual slaughter according to Jewish law for fish. Fish can be killed in any way, and it's considered kosher as long as the fish itself is considered kosher. So there we see there's the obligation for flocks and herds, and we also see in the top verse that there is obligation for not to eat any flesh that is torn of beasts in the field. Meaning, if another animal or person is going to come and I think according to the simple meaning, the pshat of the verse, it would be referring to scavenging. We are not to scavenge animals which were killed by other predators and to eat them. The slaughter we must do the slaughter. That is going to be that illustrates the obligation for ritual slaughter, and thus we get into a problem with hunting and falconry in particular, where the raptor, the bird which is going to catch the other bird, is going to tear that animal, the bird. For Jews, what Jews are going to want to eat the bird which is caught, a partridge or a quail, for example, or a duck. Do you know the names of these birds in Spanish?
Say them again.
These are birds that are in the wild and are considered kosher to eat. Duck, babas. Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure you understand the types of birds that we're talking about. But if the falcon or the hawk is going to go and tear it, which is what they do, then it's not going to be considered kosher. So right there we have a problem with practicing falconry. Now that problem, I'm claiming, is an issue in the Talmud Bavli. The Talmud Bavli is trying to find a solution to that problem. And we're going to see that's also a problem in the Quran itself. Because in the Quran we're going to see that there's this obligation, and they also are dealing with the problem, and each one is dealing with the problem in its own way, but they're dealing with the same problem. And so studying how each one is dealing with the problem helps us to put together that this is the problem they're dealing with. Okay, so let's go. Next step, we go into the Mishnah. This is the early stage of the oral law. Rabbi Yehuda Omer drusata ze'ev b'daka drusata ribegasa drusata netz ba'of hadak drusata hagaz ba'of hagas ze haklal kol she'en kamo hachaya trefa. Rabbi Judah says small cattle are trefa if clawed by a wolf, large cattle if clawed by a lion, small fowl if clawed by a hawk, large fowl if clawed by a falcon. This is the rule. If an animal with a similar defect could not continue to live, it is trefa. Let's start with the rule at the bottom. The rule is that if this damaging, this taref, is something that is a mortal wound, something that would kill the animal will no longer be able to live, it is considered trefa. But if it's not, if it's just a scratch, something, it's okay. Then the animal can still be ritually slaughtered and consumed. That's the purpose of the rule. And the first part, there's more of a particular definition. If a small raptor, a small bird of prey, is going to attack a large bird, which he's not going to be able to kill, but then and is not successful, but he scratches him, then that's okay. We don't consider that a problem with this biblical verse that it's considered torn. That's not going to be considered a problem. But if the raptor is large and claws him, then it's no longer kosher. So this now the Mishnah this is a Palestinian source, and falconry was probably not practiced in this milieu. The source is not referring to falconry. The source is probably referring to farmers, that they have their chickens in their farm, and the hawks and the wolves and they're perfectly happy to eat domestic chicken, whatever they can get. And if they come and attack the farmers' animals, so we need to know what is acceptable and what is not acceptable, and does not deal. So my claim is that this source does not not concerned with falconry or practicing falconry in any way, shape, or form. It's for falconers. But the Talmud Bavli understands well, it could be the Talmud Bavli also. The Talmud Bavli has this extensive discussion about exactly what is going to be considered a problem and what is not going to be considered a problem. It's going left and right to find all kinds of exceptions to this rule. I'll skip the Aramaic, and we can just look at the English. We have it on tradition that clawing is only on the foreleg. Only say if we're dealing with a lion or a wolf. If he claws with the front legs, that makes a problem, but with the rear legs does not make a problem. The reason for that, we'll see explicitly at the end, the reason for that is because the problem with the clawing is understood in the Talmud Bavli as a problem that the cause of psul is caused by venom. Venom, which is a poison, like a snake emits venom from the teeth. Well, according to the Talmud Bavli, these animals, both the falcon and hawk, and also lions and wolves, are emitting venom through their claws or talons, and this is the cause. Now, this is a somewhat bizarre scientific concept, and I searched everywhere. If anyone here has found this scientific concept anywhere in Western or Eastern literature, I would be very happy. I have not found anywhere. So my theory is that this concept is part of the solution to permit falconry. This is how we're going to get to the solution. Because it gives an opening by which we can say that the venom has not been emitted. If the venom is not emitted, then it's kosher. Okay. So the venom is only going to be emitted from the front legs. This is this is referring to lions and wolves. Clawing is only with the claws, thus excluding the teeth. If the animal tears up with the teeth, not a problem, because the venom is not emitted through the teeth. Yeah. Clawing must be intentional. If it happened by accident, no problem, because the venom is only going to come out if the predator is meaning to attack. Okay, it goes on and on and on. We'll skip down to the bottom. Okay, now you might have thought that it discharges the poison at once when it strikes with the claw. No. We therefore learn that it discharges the poison only when it withdraws the claws. Yeah? As long as the hawk, in fact, has grabbed the bird that it wishes to catch, and even though it's pierced him, but it still is not, according to the Talmud, it's not emitted the venom. It's still kosher. If you can do the ritual slaughter while he's holding it, then according to that, it will be kosher. Now, why is the Talmud going into this? Here's this illustration. This is an illustration from a modern book, illustrated guide to Tractate Chulin, where all these laws of kashrut are discussed. There's many illustrations. It's actually illustrated by a friend of mine, Rabbi Amitai ben David. His father went to school with my father, so he was very happy. He was very generous to provide me with this illustration from his book. As long as the hawk is grabbing the animal which he's tried to catch and has not yet killed him or significantly damaged him, as long as he's still holding, then he can be slaughtered. And this sounds fantastic. It sounds fantastic, but it's real. It's real. and Jews in France, we have sources from medieval France that they relied on this source to permit falconry. In actuality, not as a theoretical concept. So in France, in medieval France, we know the Jews were actually relying on this and doing this because of the discussion which ensues there. So what I would claim based on this and what we see from the Islamic sources is that was what was driving this whole discussion here in the Talmud Bavli, and with the introduction of this scientific view of the venom, is at the end, the goal, we have a permission to practice falconry. Okay. we'll get back to the medieval sources in a bit, but now let's go into the Quran. And you're going to have to help me also here, okay? Please speak up. Okay. So we have Surah alMaidah, Ma'idah 5. Here we have the parallel to our biblical verses, which prohibit consumption of animals that were not ritually slaughtered. This is the location in the Quran where we see that animals must be slaughtered. Is the Arabic, is it good?
Yeah.
The Arabic is good? Okay. Okay, so prohibited, I translated just the selection. Actually, I didn't translate it. It was took it from the internet.
Mm-hmm.
Prohibited to you are dead animals, blood, the flesh of swine, and that which has been dedicated to other than Allah. And those animals killed by strangling, or by a violent blow, or by a headlong fall, or by the goring of horns, and those from which a wild animal has eaten, except what you are able to slaughter before its death. Yeah, so we see that particularly what the wild animal has eaten or slaughtered, this is parallel very much to our biblical verse, that this is prohibited. So this is the basic law. Now, according to this, if you have just this in the Quran, and well, what about falconry? How can you do falconry? So it would be forbidden.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, falconry would be forbidden if the hawk is going to go and catch a bird and kill the bird. You're not going to be able to eat it. It'll be haram. Yes. Unless they're going to do something fancy like this, like the Jews. Yeah. So like this could be permitted. Okay. But in a normal case where it would be killed, it would apparently be forbidden. So here the Quran is speaking in the main voice, which is the deity is speaking to the prophet or to the reader directly. Yes? Allah is speaking to the deity here. The very next section in the Quran, 4, we have here a dialogue between the deity and the prophet and Muhammad.
Mm-hmm.
Yes? So apparently this law, this stringency that we have of that we can't eat what has been killed is a problem, because we want to hunt, we want to do there's a problem there. So this needs to be addressed, particularly between the prophet. We need a special instruction, an exception. We need an exception to this rule. So they ask you, O Muhammad, what has been made lawful for them? They want to do hunting or fowl, they want to get a clearer picture, say, lawful for you are all good foods and game caught by what you have trained of hunting animals, which you train as Allah has taught you. So eat of what they catch for you, and mention the name of Allah upon it, and fear Allah. Indeed, Allah is swift in account. So here we have an explicit exception, which is given for the use of hunting animals. Now, we'll get into particularly what there's in Ibn Rushd. There's a big discussion about this section about which hunting animals are permitted. The dog explicitly mentioned here, and is it what is similar to the dog? Are hawks and falcons also included? Are they similar to the dog? But here we seem to have if you add, I haven't read the original Arabic, but based on the translation, I would say that here we have a blanket exception for hunting, that with using dogs, hawks, falcons, you could do whatever you like, as long as you mention Bismillah Allah, yeah, on the before eating somehow, that all of this is permitted. So up to here, I would argue that we have these early sources, possibly coming from Palestinian sources, where falconry and hunting are not practiced centrally. Perhaps they're agricultural societies, and where it's moving both into the Talmud Bavli region, the Persian region, and also into the Arabic region, they need to bring in this exception. This is the same type of exception, but each one is bringing the exceptions in a different way. In the Quran, it's very direct. It's a very direct exception. In the Talmud Bavli, it's more convoluted, scientific types of exceptions, which are bringing us to. But the goal is the same, which is to permit falconry and hunting and falconry. Okay, clear? Any questions? Okay, now let's jump back to the Jewish sources. So in the medieval, and now we're jumping from Babylon, the Talmud Bavli, Persia, to medieval France, yeah, which is a major center of Jewish law. Rashi, Rabbeinu Tam, Balei Tosafot. These are the classic sources which are studied in Jewish law in depth to this day. So, based on the Talmud Bavli, which we saw, where it says that the venom is only emitted when the hawk or falcon releases, so we have sources which explicitly permit falconry and discuss that it's permitted and it's done with supervision. What needs to be supervised according to Jewish law? You need to make sure that the hawk did not release the grip. Because if the hawk released the grip, then the venom was emitted. So you need to make sure that the hawk grabs him and holds him. Now, this may seem like somewhat a bizarre thing to remember, but as we'll see, I'll show that is what the hawk does. The cetrería, the hawk, he's called because he squeezes. He grabs and squeezes, and he does not let go. We'll see in a minute. Okay.
Just one thing,
Yeah.
because in Spanish, falcon is halcón, and then hawk, we are not all know about it, because I had to make a whole research in Google to find out the difference between the two of them, and it's really complicated.
Uh-huh.
But what I can clear is that hawk could be translated as Milano. So, but if you could give us more details on how to differentiate.
Very soon, we'll go into more of this distinction. What's important?
Also, thought.
We'll see in it. But what's important is that hawks and falcons are different species. They're completely different species, and they look similar. And it's like there was the evolutionary study. I don't remember who was the not Darwin, but his Watson, I believe, was it, that found the two butterflies in South America. I don't know if they looked almost identical, but they were completely different species. But because they evolved in the same environment, they both developed exactly the same. So as hawks and falcons are also similar, like this. They're different species. They do not interbreed, and they kill in different ways, but they look very similar. And especially in the medieval period, where they did not have our knowledge of taxonomy, there was a lot of confusion, regarding the different animals. But we'll see that the Jewish falconry is only going to work with the hawk. With the falcon, it's not going to work. Everything is going to be treif because of the way the falcon attacks and kills.
How do you say falcon and hawk in Hebrew?
Tremendous confusion with all the bird names. Already in the Bible itself, we have all these different names, and all of the commentators have explain different species. But in modern Hebrew, a falcon is baz, but that's a Persian word. Some say it's shalach in the Bible. Some say, but baz, we refer to it in the Mishnah, which we saw. It might be getz. And commonly, the hawk is referred to as nates. Nates, nun sadi. Okay, so let's go back to medieval France. Falconry can be permitted with supervision to make sure that the hawk does not release the grip. That's according to Rav Baruch ben Isaac, Sefer Truma. He was a student of Rav Yitzhak Midan Pierre, one of the great Balei Tosafot. And that's also mentioned by the Rashba, Rav Shlomo ben Adret of Barcelona. Also comes that, and he is just citing the French source. That source is coming to him. Falconry. Then we have the opposition, the resistance to this. Right? In general, the principle, the biblical principle, there would be no permission for falconry hunting. But then the Talmud comes and gives this exception, and the exception is relied upon, and then that's resisted in number 2, antithesis. Falconry forbidden, even with supervision. Yeah. In my paper, I discuss what are the parameters of their argument. But there are those who came and said no, that it is not permitted. And then we have the third path in medieval France to get out of the problem, which is to put silver talon covers on the talons to cover, and that way that blocks the venom. Yeah, so he catches, and it seems fantastic. It's brought in 2 places. They say that the Rev Isaac of Norwich in England, medieval England, Jewish community practice, which is very similar to France. And there's another attribution to Rabbeinu Tam. I discussed this in depth in the article, and also I just remembered. I didn't think of it. In my article, I mentioned something by a Spanish falconer, where he discusses today scientists using this exact method to trap specimens. To use the hawk or falcon to trap a live specimen for scientific study from the wild, they put covers on the hawk and have the hawk go and trap these wild animals, and then the scientists come in and take the animal basically unharmed in order to study. This is in a Spanish falconer discusses this. Okay, so we have the falcon and the hawk. Yeah, you can understand why in the medieval period that they're and in the falconry manuals they'll often distinguish between the color of the eyes. They'll use that as the distinction. Okay, now the falcon. Let's first talk about the falcon. The falcon kills. He goes up to a very high altitude, and he swoops down very fast, and he strikes, and he can kill just with that strike, right away. So that's not going to be good for the Jews with that. And the other thing he has is he has a special tooth in his beak. As before, I call it terminal tooth, and he uses that tooth to break the spinal cord. To break the spinal cord, the nerve in the neck, he can break it with the terminal tooth in his tooth. It's also not good for the Jews. The falcon, there's a type of falconry, Islamic type of falconry, relies more heavily on the falcon, on the training of the falcon, and the falcon makes a real spectacle. Like you go and you watch how he zooms, and the hawk does everything with the talons. He grabs and squeezes, and he has a special ratchet mechanism in his talons that enable him to squeeze with a great amount of pressure. Yeah, and once he starts squeezing, he cannot let go. One falconer told me a story about where a hawk caught a fish, and the fish was too big, and went into the water and carried the hawk underwater and drowned because he could not. Once he starts this process, he cannot release. So then you can understand the Talmudic source where the Jews are going to come in and slaughter. It's very, very realistic. It's not so fantastic. Okay, I mentioned Isaac of Norwich, who made the covers. They made the covers. So just as an aside for color here, I said that we actually have a depiction of Isaac of Norwich from the period. This is from the early 13th century in England. This is one of the first anti-Semitic characters that we have, and Isaac of Norwich is at the top there. It says on left, right, Isaac of Norwich, and there's a whole scene here. It's portrayed that he's running everything. He's the Jew that controls everything, and he's depicted with 3 faces. So the 3 faces in the Christian world, is how they would depict the Antichrist. I have here some images of depictions of Jews in medieval France. That you see the Jew has three faces. There, so I was able to title the chapter of my paper "Silver Talons on the Hawk of the Jewish Antichrist." That was my. So yeah.
Not very attractive.
That was exciting. Okay, so now, but we see in medieval French rabbinic Jewish literature, we have this whole discussion of the parameters of the permission, that they want to limit the permission and have this discussion about limiting the permission. So also in medieval Islamic law, in the fiqh, we have extensive, actually much more extensive discussions than in Jewish literature about limiting the permission according to the Quran. I just had time here just to list some of the names which are discussed in Ibn Rushd. And what's best to do here, is everybody okay with questions? We're okay for time? Yeah?
Okay.
We're okay? All right. So now we're really getting out of my specialty and probably more into yours. So maybe I will call on you. Let's go back to the Quran. We have the general law here that shkita is required, and then we have the exceptions. Okay. So in Ibn Rushd we have this discussion, and the discussion is really based on the terminology here. How are we referring to? How are we? Which words are we using for? I'll ask me Ramadan. For what you have trained of hunting animals. Which names of the animals that are doing the hunting? Which animals are they? Which animals are allowed according to this? Zawarih.
Is like
What is it referring to?
the
Jawarih.
the predators. I think.
Predators?
Mukallibina,
Yeah.
tuallimuna, humna. Those mukallibina, I don't know what it means exactly, but it's the animals you have trained.
Okay, so I can tell you in Hebrew, kelev is dog. And so some of there understand
yes.
that it's referring to a dog, but some don't understand that it's referring. Some understand that it's referring in general to something of predators. Okay.
Those animals that perform like dogs, hunting dogs.
Okay. That perform like dogs. Okay. You know what? I think I'll just say from memory, without mentioning the names of which of the legal authorities are, but. So we have Jawira and Jawarih and Mukubalim. So which animals are like dogs? What is special about dogs? Which ones are like dogs? So we have a whole range of opinions. So we want to know if they can be trained. Now, dogs are domesticated animals that can be fully trained. They're really fully domesticated. Hawks and falcons are not. They remain wild animals. The animal was a wild animal which was trapped from the wild. And it cannot. There's a limit to how much it can be trained, and it's a much more difficult process because we're starting with a wild animal. We're harnessing in falconry. We're harnessing a wild animal and teaching it. So there are those who say that it's not like the dog, and that's only the dog. Only the dog is permitted, or only animals which you could train as the dog. So some say only a falcon. Some of the Islamists say a falcon is permitted, but other birds or cats are also discussed, like cheetahs, which can be trained to hunt. Some say only a falcon. So what is this word makubalim?
According to the vocalization, mukallibina.
Mukalibina. What is mukalibin? Mukalab.
Animal.
Sí.
Y sus jawarah.
Mukallib.
Mukalleb, este es Mukalleb.
Ah, los que agarran, pues,
Está listo.
predadores,
Es
¿no?
de presa.
With the claw.
Sí.
Okay.
Mukalleb الجوارح يعني está muy listo, muy fuerte para cazar cualquier.
But is it
Depredador.
Sí.
is it referring particularly to what we call dogs today, what, like a common dog, or would it be also
Como
like
un
a
perro,
wolf
¿no?
or
Perro.
Hmm.
perro? No es perro? ¿Qué es?
Mukalleb es este.
Es
Claw?
perros,
Tiene garras,
perros y también.
Ávila es el.
With claws,
Garras.
¿no?
Garras.
Okay. But what are people going to be hunting? So what are people going to be hunting with, other than dogs? What could it be? What else could it be referring to?
The animals with claws.
¿Qué animal?
الصقر.
A soccer? Macaba.
El sacro es considerado de los animales que lleva, que es Mukalleb. Tiene.
Garras.
Sí.
Claw.
El haddad blanca. El haddad.
No sé.
Okay. Here, I'll read you a section from Ibn Rushd in the English translation. So first he discusses that there's a disagreement, that some permit only the dog, some permit also the falcon, some permit all birds of prey to be included. It says the reason for disagreement in this topic is based upon two factors. The first is the analogy for all the predatory animals and birds of prey from the case of the dog, because it is believed that the text has permitted it for dogs. That is, in the words of the Exalted, and those jawarih, which ye have trained as hounds, dogs are trained, teaching them what Allah has taught you, that's this source. Unless it is interpreted to mean that the word mukallibin is derived from the pouncing of the predatory animal, and not from the meaning of the word dog.
But
Yeah.
it's open to.
It's open to different interpretations. That's what Ibn Rushd is saying. It's open to interpretation. So this is indicated by the generality of the word al-jawarih, used for predatory animals and birds of prey in the verse. On the basis of this, the reason for disagreement is the equivocality of the word mukallibin. So says Ibn Rushd. Then I'll skip a bit where he goes on. Then he goes on to discuss about whether the other animals can be trained in the same way that a dog can be trained or not. But that's are they similar or not similar? Then he goes and mentions something which was very interesting to me as a rabbinic scholar. He says those who made an exception only for the falcon, say the falcon is okay, but not other hawks, not other birds, decided on the basis of the tradition of Adi ibn Hatim, who said, I asked the messenger of Allah, I assume this is Muhammad, about the game caught by a falcon, and he said, okay, eat what it catches for you. It is recorded by al-Tirmidhi. Al-Tirmidhi. It is recorded by al-Tirmidhi. This is a hadith. This is a hadith. So we have a hadith which explicitly permits a falcon. Yes? But then there's a discussion about if that hadith is reliable. Yeah? And there's, it's understandable the hadith that's just on the falcon. This is very similar to in rabbinic literature, in the Talmudic literature, what we refer to as a breita. In the I showed here on this here that we have I put here hadith below Quran, and then we have Mishnah, early midrash. So the Mishnah is a particular body of early laws which are in the authoritative work, but there are all kinds of extra ones, which we refer to as toseftot, or which are additional teachings, or braitot, which are discussed in the Talmud Bavli. And not everybody relies on them, but it can be brought as a proof, as a somewhat strong proof in the Talmud all the time. This is exactly what Ibn Rushd. This is exactly what we have the same part. He quotes a hadith that proves that the falcon is okay. It's like very many sugyot sections in the Talmud Bavli. So he gets to the falcon. Let's see. Now, then I'll brief you to. So he discusses training, how if the animal can be trained. We're running out of time? Okay.
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay, I'm wrapping it up then. So a dog. This is one of the opinions that Ibn Rushd cites for training the dog, training an animal that would be trained and considered. The first is that you call the predatory animal or bird of prey and it comes to you. You call and it comes to you. The second is that you send it to catch an animal and he goes. Yeah? And the third is that if you deter it from something, it stops. You say, stop. So, and he stops. He follows you and all those things. So a trained dog will follow you in all those three things. So they extrapolated, those are the things that we need to test for the falcon and the other animals. And it's not so clear which animals do and don't, because like I said, the falcon and the hawk are wild animals. So they might only do some of the things and not the others. Like it's very difficult to get a falcon or hawk to return, to come back. You have to wave this object to lure to bring it back, and it's often difficult. And sometimes he can sit in the tree and it can take hours until he comes back. It's a problem. So, but at the end of this section, Ibn Rushd says the majority of the jurists permit the eating of game caught by the falcon and the hawk, even if they eat of it. There's an whole discussion. The Quran permits, but that the idea is that the predator is doing the catching for the master. He's like your servant, your messenger, your shaliach to bring it back to you. But what if he eats it himself? Then it's a problem. It could be a particular problem, because then he's not doing it for you. He's doing it as an extension of your dabach. He's doing it for himself. And then then that's not. So we have a whole extensive discussion of that. But the majority permit, according to Ibn Rushd. So we see here that in both branches of literature, in the rabbinic and in the Islamic, we start out with a prohibition from probably the biblical prohibition, or at least maybe perhaps an early Semitic a blanket prohibition, which might be related with agriculture, and then going off into the Babylonian Talmud and the Quran, the need to introduce a permission for the hunting, and then later in the later medieval sources, extensive discussions about the exactly where we can permit it and where we can't, because we want to be loyal to the original principle. Also, there's a tension between the original principle and the suggestion in both literatures. So we have these extensive discussions. So by opening up my study into the Islamic literature, I was able to together my understanding of the rabbinic literature by seeing the parallel, by seeing the pattern, because it's not obvious to explain the Mishnah against the Talmud Bavli. This is actually in traditional Talmud studies. This is academic Talmud study. This is not done in the traditional yeshivot. And to claim that this is what's driving the Talmud Bavli. What's driving the Talmud Bavli is the same thing which was driving in the Quran. This need to permission. My limited understanding of the Islamic sources helps me to strengthen my resolve that this is what's going on in the rabbinic sources. I think there's very little interplay between the rabbinic and the Islamic sources here. Maybe just at the very beginning, and then I think they each go their own way, but they're dealing with the same issues and developing in their own like parallel universe in a way, and that each one can inform us of the other. So, thank you very much.
Well, so now if anybody has any question,
Yeah.
I'm
more interested on a social perspective, and more specifically on the discussion between the Rashba and Aaron Ben Aklara in Barcelona, because both of them were coetáneos.
Yes.
Both of them were living in the same city at the same time.
Yes.
So on what ground it is based the opposition or their approach to the question of one of them is forbidding the falconry, the other one is permitting. So the question is, it is based on social or approach, or it is based on more technical issues, because Aaron Ben Aklara was always very critical with the Rashba.
Yes. Yes.
So I don't know if this is part of the general criticism he's making on...
That is a very good question, and that is a question that I've thought about quite a bit in depth. I'll tell you right now that this is something that's very close to my heart, because in my research in Girona, one of my findings was a lost Talmudic commentary of Rav Aaron Ha-Levi, Dina Clara, his Kedushim on Tractate Psachim. And I was able to identify the fragments based on how he refers to his great-grandfather, Rav Zerachi Levi, as Adoniz Keni Rav Zerachi, which is a formula which only he uses to refer to his grandfather. And so for those who don't know, in the late 13th century, the Rashba, he was a student of the Ramban, of Nachmanides. The Rashba was, in many ways, he's one of the greatest rabbinic figures, most influential and authoritative figures in medieval rabbinic world. And his great rival was Rav Aaron Levi. Rav Aaron Levi was a Talmid Muvhak. He was of the Ramban. He was a closer student of the Ramban. He was a direct disciple of the Ramban, more so than the Rashba. The Rashba published a book called Torah Bayit, which deals with kashrut issues and other issues which we now refer to as Yoredea in rabbinic literature. And it was a very popular book that it appears like many rabbinic works in a long version and a short version, which just gives the summary of everything. And that was called Torah Bayit. Rav Aaron Levi wrote a critical gloss on it, criticizing many sections, which was referred to as Bedek Abayit, which is the biblical verse, which in this sense means checking or fixing the house. And the Rashba is one of the rare occurrences where we could see that he was obviously very personally hurt by this gloss, and he published an anonymous work entitled responding, and he responds with some of the most vituperous attack, direct personal attack on Rav Aaron Levi that you'll find anywhere in rabbinic literature, and he published it anonymously. But later he admitted that he wrote it. So this is the tension that we have between these two sages. And so in this case, the Rashba is basically bringing the source from France, citing it, that it's permitted. And the Rashba helped me to see, the Talmud Bavli is not explicitly referring to falconry per se. It's referring to the laws of kashrut of an animal that catches it. I'm claiming that falconry is what's driving everything. But I'm using in the medieval in France and with the Rashba in Catalonia, they are talking about falconry based on this Talmudic source. what I'm saying is that, well, that was really what was driving the Talmudic source from the very beginning. So the Rashba actually reads it into the Talmud more. That helped. The Rashba there strengthened my explanation of the Talmud Bavli. The Rashba seems to have more of a, but on the other hand, the Rashba also seems to have more of a reluctance, like with the supervision. He stresses the need for supervision more so than the original source, Sefer HaTrumah. Then the opposition, which in number 2 have Tosafot and Rav Aaron Levy. They're not the same opposition. They're different. They're different oppositions. They're not the same principle. The principle of the Tosafot is, how do we know? We can't supervise well enough. Maybe he released and then he attacked again. We don't. Maybe we don't know. So I talk about that in depth in my article, and I suggest that it might be related to a confusion between the falcon and the hawk. That the original Tosafot was permitting and actually doing it was using the hawk, which you can supervise, but the opposition may have not been familiar with it. The falcon might have confused them. That's the Tosafot. Rav Aaron Levy, his opposition is Talmudic based, intellectual based. It's based on another section of the Talmud here, which discusses where the venom is released, and he says maybe we need to worry that it's similar to the other case, a different case, where venom is released, and there it's talking about a cat, I believe. So his opposition is somewhat independent. I thought about this a lot, and I thought what you were asking. I thought that maybe there was, like the falconry. The falconry is really French in the medieval. It goes everywhere, but the French are just crazy about falconry. Even Shakespeare discusses how the French are crazy about falconry. It's associated with the French kingdoms, and this is moving into Catalonia, into Christian Spain, very much, and that's how the falconry is coming in. I thought that maybe there's a type of Sephardi resistance to this. It's not being part of the Jewish culture. Falconry was not part of that Jewish culture, and if to introduce this practice from the north, from the French, maybe that's part of the resistance of Rav Aaron Levy. But that's not what he says. He gives a very dry Talmudic. So maybe we also have to worry about this other case, which no one else was worried about. In the number 1, they were not worried about it, and even Tosafot in France, he was not concerned about that case. So that was a novelty of Rav Aaron Levy. I actually in my article I only discussed the argument between the Rashba and Aaron Levy in the abstract in Hebrew. I wrote the article in English, and I didn't even mention it there, but I put it in the abstract in Hebrew just so there would be something for it's a different audience. So that was where I briefly mentioned this. I'm hoping in Girona, by the way, that one of the things in searching in the newly discovered manuscripts from the book bindings is more works from Rav Aaron Ha-Levi in particular, because many of his works have been lost. Most of the Rashba's works have been preserved, and we have today, but Rav Aaron Ha-Levi did not. His works were widely read at the time, but many of them did not survive.
However, the truth would be the opposite. Aaron Ha-Levi was more provincial minded than Rashba. Rashba was more Sephardic in that sense.
That could be. Then that wouldn't be an explanation. That's what I didn't write about this. These are just things that I thought of. I don't. Yeah, hard to say, but difficult to say. Also, province. The falconry centers in northern France, and that's something moving down. And there's also a tension between northern France and Provence in the rabbinic literature, between Rabbeinu Tam and Rabbeinu Meshulam, for example, between these different traditions. It's not exactly clear that falconry is part of the provincial Jewish tradition either. The only place where I can point my finger to and say they were doing it is in northern France, and England. That's where it was occurring. But in Providence in Spain, they discuss it legally, but there doesn't seem to be much evidence that they were actually practicing it. Also, then back to Persia and Babylon, where it's discussed. So the evidence there is that Jews were actually practicing it. I'm not the first one who's claimed it. It was by Hans Epstein in his the Origins of Falconry article. He claimed that the Jews practiced falconry there, and I tend to think that it was practiced but even in France, I think it was not really a mainstream practice, but something that on the fringes. Maybe today, like skiing. Like, would you say that Orthodox Jews ski today? Well, not really, not so, but some do. A few do. Falconry might have been. There's also this element of falconry about, we go back to the original. There's something regal about it, and many of these Jewish communities were connected with the king, and something about having access to the king. When the king is out, on his falconry hunt, and this might be akin to something today like golfing. We have a golf, for business. You go to do, for business. So in medieval France, if you wanted to do business, so you'd have to go do the falconry.
For contemporary, the Gulf monarchs are absolutely mad
Falconry,
about falconry. It's so important in their political discourse.
It's so important, and that they're relying on these permissive opinions, and not everybody relies on that, because we do have fundamentalism of that, and there is opposition to their falconry practice within the Islamic world.
It would be interesting for someone who is not familiar with Islamic law and with Arabic. It would be interesting, apart from Ibn Rushd, who is a very handy author because he has this compilation of different, where he explains the different positions and the grounds for the different positions. There is a very similar work by an Eastern Muslim jurist, Ibn Qudama, who he was born in I was checking in the internet, by the way. He wrote a work similar to Averroes' Bidaya, the jurist primer, and it has been translated into English. I was checking, and it's exactly the same type of work, and as it has been translated into English, and they are both contemporaries. So it might give you a perspective from the East, from the Palestinian, Syrian perspective, from a different legal tradition, because even Qudama belonged to a different legal school.
Right. I just got into the the Ibn Rushd with Maliki,
yes,
the school of Sunnah.
Yes.
Okay, but so I don't know exactly the differences between the different traditions, but from what I was able to understand, they're in Sunnah they're mostly relying on the same sources, but the difference is what the priorities.
Maybe it might be interesting to compare between both authors, just to check whether there are cultural and social issues affecting the discourses, as in the case of these European thinkers you showed, which some among whom some are in favor of falconry and some are against, and because this is what Javier was asking for, whether it's a question of social issues.
On the other hand, you remind me of another point that I think I'll mention now, that we point out in philosophy a connection between Averroes and Maimonides, that in the philosophies. But in the legal works is a very, very different type of completely different type of legal work. That Maimonides' work is everything is streamlined as much as possible into one opinion, and not crediting by name, but just have one way to go. Ibn Rushd is citing everybody, all of the
No, but his aim is to solve
Okay.
the divergence of opinions.
Okay,
Which was
but he'll
a
describe the
problem.
problem and everything and get to the solution. The Maimonides is just the solution.
Okay.
Everything just the solution. And I think in some ways the rabbinic work of Menachem HaMeiri, Beta Bechira, is more similar to the style of Ibn Rushd. That he mentions all these he mentions all this variety of opinions, and he's often directed towards solving, but mentioning he's mentioning a wide variety of opinions. Also, the tour is a bit like that. So, but I think Menachem HaMeiri uses codes to refer to each sage. He doesn't mention them by name, but I think the structure is the same. But Maimonides is doing a very different type of legal work than Ibn Rushd. Different goal. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. I find this topic fascinating, even though I didn't know anything about it. I have two questions, just for curiosity. I wonder if these legal sources you have used talk about the question of practicing falconry, not for hunting purposes, but just for fun, not with the intention of eating the animals, but just for fun. This is a question. And the other one is if they deal with the question of practicing falconry for non-Jews or non-Muslims, but for Christians, for selling the animals to the Christians, or even giving them just a gift, or not with the intention of eating themselves the animal, but for giving them to someone else.
Yeah. Okay, so sport hunting, hunting for sport. In the rabbinic sources, these rabbinic sources are concerned with kashrut, and so it's concerned with eating. And by the way, there's a whole extended in my paper. One section is a whole extended legal discussion on if you can ride on a horse together with dogs or together with a hawk. If it's allowed or not. And what's the problem? That in the Bible we have a prohibition on plowing with the ox and the horse together. Both to do together doing the work. So we're not allowed to work with two different species. So is there a problem with working with the two different species when we're with the horse and the there's an extensive discussion in medieval France about this, including with the hawk. And that also shows that they were practicing. This is something that applies only to Jews then. But sport hunting, let's see. We have kinegeticus. And that word is discussed in the Palestinian rabbinic sources, kinegia. They're using the Greek loanword to this. And this can refer to Roman-style hunting, which can often be for sport. It can even apply to gladiator events. It can apply to a wide variety of events like this where there's some type of entertainment value. So these early Palestinian sources are very negative about these practices. And it appears that these discussions are where it's concerned with food or providing food, then we're often very lenient. Where it's this entertainment value, then there's a very negative perspective brought in. And later rabbinic sources will bring in this negativity, the negative view, and that negative view is mostly coming from Ashkenaz, from Hasidei Ashkenaz. Also, to make it, I'll make it very general, but in France, Chachmei Tzarfat, the French sages, were very mixed with the surrounding Gentile culture, much more so than Hasidei Ashkenaz, a group in Ashkenaz that were very pious and cut off from the world. That's where the opposition is focused. But these early sources, they ignore it. And other scholars have pointed this out. It's a bit perplexing how they talk about the falconry and the hunting and things like that, and they're not concerned with problems with sport hunting, or what was referred to in Jewish law as tsar balei chayim, of animal cruelty. Animal cruelty is a concept which is prohibited, and it's just not a factor. It's just not really considered here. There's a very famous response from the 18th century by a sage, the Notabi Yehuda Landau, where he's asked about sport hunting. That's the famous one. And I claim, my own observation, and I think it's absolutely obvious once you look at it, it's true, that the reason why it had to be discussed then, at that time, was the invention of the gun, of the rifle. We speak about going out. It made it much more, because see, hunting is like a practice. It's like an art. It's an art form. It's something you have to do. You learn. It's the art of Esau, right? In the Bible, the hunting is an art. It's not, the Jews were not involved in this art, really. But once you could just get a gun, anybody could go. You don't need, there's no chachma. You don't need any wisdom to go out and shoot. So it became a question, and so we actually have two responses from that period. So sport hunting is a very interesting question about whether the Jewish type of hunting seems to be more oriented towards food, towards getting the food, not the regal type that we find with Alfonso and Frederick, I believe. Now, selling to Gentiles, this is a whole separate topic in Jewish law, involved with trapping. There's a question if you're trying to trap a kosher animal and you end up trapping an animal which is not kosher, if you could sell it, there's extensive legal discussions surrounding this. I didn't go into these topics in depth. I did mention a topic in my paper, which was a mixed hunting party going out of Jews and Gentiles together, going out to hunt, and possible tension that could result there, because in medieval France there's a biblical commandment with hunting deer, non-domesticated animals, which is that the blood must be covered. As mentioned in the Bible, we have the chisat damo. The blood that is spilled must be covered. So in medieval France, there was a Christological, allegorical interpretation that says that we don't have to do this. We don't have to. It's meant allegorically. We don't have. And Bechor Shor, who's actually makes the commentary here, which is depicted here, speaks very, very strongly against these allegorical interpretations. And I speculate in the article that these Jews wanted to hide they didn't want to stick out as being Jewish in a mixed hunting party. That might be a motivation for allegorizing away this commandment. There definitely would have been some types of mixed hunting parties, and they could be complicated. Does the Jew want to do the slaughtering to make sure that that he goes and to do it? We don't know. We don't have sources which describe this.
All right.
All right.
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.